Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, March 10th, 2022. Plenty to catch up with today. Lots going on, a little too much, I would say. And I do need to make sure my alarm is all properly set for our breaks, because there's so much to get to today. And running around in the kitchen in the last couple minutes before the show and catching up on all the gossip on Twitter and elsewhere. It's one of those days, you know. So like I said, many things to catch up on today. Today's the day experimenting with a tea that I went back to. We had a couple of these. I think I mentioned to you that somebody... As a matter of fact, it was the production staff here in-house. That's how we like to refer to our family members, as production staff, who gave me the whiskey tea, just figuring, hey, there are two things, among many others, that you sometimes drink, so why not put the two of them together? And today's the sort of day, I don't think there's any whiskey in it. I don't know what they do to it to make it taste like this. It must be one of those things that they put things in an empty whiskey barrel, a used whiskey barrel at some point. I don't know how you do it with tea, or maybe it's just, I don't know, it could be artificial flavoring. At any rate, just saw that on the shelves somewhere and brought me the Edinburgh Tea and Coffee Company. And I guess they thought it would be a good idea to sell this whiskey-flavored tea. It's not very heavily flavored. But I think today's the sort of day when, okay, the reality is that, it's morning, and you probably shouldn't be drinking whiskey just yet. Although, some people will probably do that. And but it's the sort of day that, yes, you need the tea, or at least it's more proper that you start off with the tea, so first thing in the morning. But the sort of day that when you look at the news, you say... shouldn't I pretend that I'm drinking booze? Because this is, it's a hell of a day out there, is what I'm saying. And I guess back in the day, it was good enough for the founders to drink alcohol and spirits for breakfast, then it should be good enough for all of us as well. I guess beer was a pretty popular drink in the days of the, colonial days and the founding, before tea and coffee really took off. Although I guess tea was pretty popular. Though we were throwing it in the Boston Harbor at the same time. So, you never know. I read somewhere once that, clean water supplies were few and far between. And so a beer in the morning was not an uncommon thing at the breakfast table back then. And I guess that's how they ended up screwing up the Second Amendment so badly and coming up with that nonsensical language. I don't know. Anyway, there's lots going on, plenty happening in Ukraine that we need to catch up on, some of which may or may not be true, and we need to, traffic in the rumors that one side and the other are trading, because you can't not do that. Speculation being the order of the day. As a matter of fact, Darwin sent me a note this morning on his own speculation, worried about whether or not there's real nuclear deterrence on both sides. We're sort of questioning the underlying doctrine of mutually assured destruction. Asking a good question. Putin, close your ears, don't listen to this. He won't like the first part anyway. Putin, he says, is not winning this war. That seems plausible. It's not the lightning victory he wanted, that's for sure. And he seems to be frustrated to the point of committing war crimes. That increasingly obvious as well. If all he has left is shock and awe, just destroying Ukraine indiscriminately, what would happen if he drops a nuke on Kyiv? I mean, it's still destruction. It's still isolated, though, mostly to Ukraine. Why would NATO do anything different than it's doing now? And it is a good question. I mean, the whole premise of NATO is that you would do something different. Of course, Ukraine isn't a NATO state, so, I guess you could use that excuse. But clearly, the Russians dropping nukes on their neighbors is the sort of thing that NATO was designed to deal with. So, I mean, I guess there's no provision in the NATO documents of what happens if you nuke a Warsaw Pact country, I guess. And what would matter anyway? There's no Warsaw Pact left. But You get the idea. Is it really something that we would retaliate with nuclear weapons for? Or, I don't know what you would do. So it's a good question, and as you know, it's irresponsible not to speculate. So I wanted to start off with that one because it's scary, but we'll calm you down, I think, for the rest. But yeah, I guess today's traffic, at least in right-wing circles, is that there are, and it depends what you call them, I guess, to see how alarmed you're going to get about it, biolabs, which they started out by saying biowarfare labs, which was a lot scarier, but it sounds like they couldn't, gather enough evidence or were afraid of being called out at calling them biowarfare labs because they're not, and I don't even know if they exist. So it's down to biolabs, which most countries probably have, laboratories where they do biology experiments in those countries. And as I mentioned this morning, when I was in college, I had biolabs and nobody invaded me, although they were scheduled for Friday at 4 o'clock, and that made me pretty angry, but you didn't see me invading my neighbors about it or dropping nuclear weapons. So, you can live and get past it. Anyway, so that's news. But yeah, they're trading in these rumors that, of course, now it's been expanded. In case it didn't rile you enough, they told people about there's biolabs in Ukraine, and people said, I'm watching the truckers. Shh, be quiet. And then they said, but they're Fauci biolabs, and that's where they were engineering COVID. Now you have my attention. Let's become pro-Russian again. Last week we were pro-Russian. The beginning of this week we became pro-Ukrainian. Thank you for bringing me back to pro-Russia stance again. I don't know. Confusing out there. Greg Dworkin is here. You've been to the biolabs. You know all about them, so you can give us an insider's view.
Yeah, it's where Ukraine is planning on building the Optimus Prime program.
That makes sense.
It's going to be bio-robots.
Sure, why not? Is that like Terminator? Maybe?
Something like that.
Okay. So the dogs will still know the difference, which
right.
to me gives the whole
it's
game
Russian
away.
propaganda, but Thomas Massey, who's a Republican representative who never saw a conspiracy theory he didn't like.
Probably never saw a biolab either.
Well, probably, never did. Just thinks it's. I didn't pay attention to it, but now that Glenn Greenwald says it might happen, I have to pay attention. And wow, it's really scary.
Yeah, apparently it does come from Glenn Greenwald.
Glenn Greenwald is really scary, but
it's
I
true.
don't pay attention to anything he says.
I wouldn't pay attention to anything I said, to be honest with you, because the joke is on all of you. My friend's biolab was 4 o'clock on Friday, and he was mad. I got a 690 on my biology achievements, and I didn't have to take bio. So
there you go.
Screw you.
So, here's the story. It's probably not an incredibly scary thing. It's scary, but probably not likely that anything is going to happen with nuclear weapons in Putin. I think it's a lot of saber rattling. And I don't think it's because NATO has wonderful deterrence or Dr. Strangelove lives. I think it's more like Putin and most of the people who are his cronies have at least one family, if not two, with children and grandchildren, and they just don't want to risk them.
Yeah, that's probably true. There's close connections there. It would be a cultural disaster. I don't know if Putin cares about that necessarily, but it would also become a little more difficult to hide from the Russian people, nuclear weapon use, I guess, although, in certain parts of Siberia, you'd never know the difference. But hopefully, he's got his head on straight, and he can do plenty of damage with conventional weapons and ruin all the lives he wants to.
Yeah. And plans to. There's no question that the Russian advance has slowed. They're losing generals and commanders left and right. And there's no question that Russia has the ability and the desire to do as much destruction as possible.
Yes.
They're concentrating on the south. They're going to try to end around some of the resistance areas and try to get Odessa from the north. There's a lot of stuff going on. It doesn't mean that they'll succeed in that, but they have a plan.
It's always good to have a plan, I guess, even if it's a plan for evil.
Right. And so, a lot going on. So let's start with our friend Tim Mack, man on the street.
How are you?
In Kyiv. Morning to all from Ukraine, he says. Tim Mack is an NPR reporter, a very good one. Another cold, sunny day from where I'm sitting. Kyiv remains in Ukrainian hands with very little movement on the fronts around the capital city. The world's eyes have instead been on the horrors in another place, the southeast port of Mariupol.
Oh, yes. The name keeps coming up.
Russia bombed a maternity hospital in that city, and the images there are hard to process, but observers of Putin's conduct in Syria would say this is pretty standard out of his playbook. So there's lots of images, and Ukrainian President Zelensky said, what was that? The denazification of the hospital?
No, yes.
Which is one of the many reasons why the Ukrainians are losing in terms of trying to keep their civil structure intact and winning the propaganda war. A granny, noticing I'm an American, says Tim Mack, stopped me on the street. She'd evacuated Kyiv and had no hesitation to confront me with what she wanted. Ukrainians need a no-fly zone. If the sky were closed, it would be way easier. It's just we don't have closed skies right now. Rockets were flying near Kyiv. We saw a rocket flying. And we just asked the world we suffer for no reason. I asked them to support us in all respects. Of course, rockets and no-fly zones aren't the same thing at all.
No, we don't. That's not, yeah.
Right, that's kind of the point there. Yes, I understand that she'd like the bombardment to stop, but if it's not from planes and helicopters, then having a no-fly zone doesn't make any difference, and that's one of the many reasons why no-fly zones aren't the great idea that Republicans think it is. It's something you say when you want to look tough, but not if you've actually thought through what's going on. So probably Thomas Massey supports it.
Oh, yeah, well, that's likely true. Yeah, no-fly zone, fine against manned enemy aircraft. Everything else causes problems.
So a brief interlude in history here. A reminder about the Russo-Japanese War in 1904 and 1905.
My favorite Russo War.
Okay. So the Russian Empire, czars.
Right. We should name a czar for this.
They wanted to expand into Manchuria.
Great place.
And Japan wanted to expand into Korea.
Also
and the Korean Peninsula.
People love it.
So these two empires were kind of clashing because their expansion plans were interfering with each other.
Yes,
and Japan suggested, look, Russia, why don't you take Manchuria? We'll take Korea, and we'll have tea. Ooh, and the Russians said, no. I not only want the western part of that area, I want the eastern part of your western part. So, no, we're not going to agree to that. The Imperial Japanese government saw a threat to their plans for expansion.
They were right.
And then chose to go to war, and they beat the crap out of the Russians, who everybody thought was way superior. Including the Russians, who certainly thought that they were way superior.
Yes, that they would. The Japanese might have even thought so. But
yeah, I'm not going to get into white versus Asian and the reasons why they thought they were superior, but they didn't expect to lose, and they got clobbered.
Well, okay.
So, as Wikipedia puts it, although Russia suffered a number of defeats, Emperor Nicholas II was convinced Russia could win if it fought on.
We can win.
He chose to remain engaged in the war and wait for the outcomes of naval battles, and that didn't work, so he continued to press the war to preserve the dignity of Russia by averting a humiliating peace. Japan had offered reasonable terms early on. Russia ignored them. So the end result was a complete victory of the Japanese military and the loss of life for that victory and the humiliating defeat for the Russian Empire contributed to the growing domestic unrest, which led to the 1905 Russian Revolution, and that was the end of the Tsars.
Yeah, well...
Why is that relevant? Well, I don't know. When things don't go the way you want and you start having domestic unrest, things can fall apart, as they did with the old Soviet Union under Gorbachev. Now, does that mean that that's what's going to happen now? Not necessarily. And so this is this very long but interesting tweet thread here from Kamil Galiv, who we've read before, who's Galina Starovoitova fellow at the Wilson Center.
Oh, that fellow. I thought it was the other one.
Many argue that sanctions are ineffective. That's false. They're already highly effective in undermining Russian military efforts and can be made even more efficient. They can guarantee Russia loses if they are goal-oriented and not moral crusade-oriented.
Oh, yeah, you moralists.
What he means by that is that it's not like it's going to inflict economic damage and so the population rises up and overthrows Putin by pulling statues down. That's not what happens. Goal-oriented sanctions look like making it so that you can't get McDonald's, which is what's happening. Right. And by the way, it's not necessarily governmental sanctions, it's corporation sanctions.
Yeah, you can't stop
that. Bite the deepest because that's what Russian consumers feel. And what happens is the Russian people get really annoyed. And one of the points that's made here is that Russians aren't a ideologically coherent populace by which you can put pressure to change their ideology. I keep telling you this story about the Russian doctor who worked with me. He used to say, they pretend to pay us and we pretend to work. And Camille Galif's point is they're all extremely practical people. Okay. And so the issue is if you make it so they don't have any money and they can't work and the domestic industry is shut down because nobody's buying and because nobody has any money, and also the domestic industry shuts down because they can't make stuff because the chips and parts and other stuff from overseas has stopped. Mm-hmm. That's how you put pressure on Putin. Don't expect a political revolution under a police state. Expect individual episodes of resistance to the point where things just start falling apart. That's how you get to where you need to be. So don't look for, look at that big protest in the middle of the square. That really is, that's not going to happen and wouldn't make any difference anyway. What matters a lot more are skilled workers leaving the country.
Oh, okay. Can they
Quiet,
leave?
Not especially, in the news, but happening. Okay?
Yeah,
so
I was going to say
what he does is in citing the Russo-Japan War, says Russian defeats, which were materially speaking not that impressive, had devastating moral effect because they lost the whole mythos of being, unconquerable and unstoppable. And that's actually what's happened here. The Russians can certainly do a lot of destruction, but nobody thinks that the Russian army you can't stop them. Well, actually, they're stalled. Okay. You can stall them pretty easy. Afghanistan did, and the Ukrainians are doing it.
Okay, right, true. I mean, it does put a dent in things.
Okay, so he says poverty doesn't topple regimes, material suffering doesn't topple regimes, but military defeat in a small victorious war absolutely does.
Okay.
This is typical for Russian history, and if you consider history of other regions like Latin America, it starts looking like a general rule, like the Falklands maybe. Economic sufferings in Russia are now absolutely obvious. He has a video of two women fighting over a frying pan in the last day before IKEA closed.
Over a what?
A frying pan.
A frying pan. Oh, I didn't even know they sold those. But, they do actually in the kitchenware. Okay, right.
Prices are skyrocketing.
All the Bjorn.
Prices are skyrocketing.
Okay.
And you can't
fight
get
over
cash.
the Allen wrenches, you're really in trouble.
Right.
Okay. Well, we'll see where this leads. But, I mean, I do. I have questions about how much the sanctions. Yeah, you're probably right. The sanctions aren't likely to cause an uprising in this way. I mean, Russians are pretty adept at handling deprivation, I think.
He has an amazing image that I'm going to send to you.
All right.
But easy enough to describe. Imagine that you have 5 or 6 billboards in a row. Think of the advertising you see at hockey games along outside the boards
Moscow.
there.
5 billboards outside
just
Moscow.
One product after another, after another, after another. Okay. And instead of the usual advertising, what you see are pictures of Putin.
Oh, look at that.
In various poses.
They look like pop-up ads.
Right. And it's the same thing that leads to Fox News having a lot of advertising about shows on Fox News. You can't get advertising from outside. You got to fill it with something.
Yeah, that's true. It's interesting. Where is this? In Ukraine or?
Where is this? I don't know where it is. It doesn't say exactly
Boston.
Where it is.
What? No. Okay. Well, that's all right.
No, this is in Russia.
Yes, I assume so. But
not Ukraine. But the point is, it matters. So he points out the Russian economy is super fragile, and it's critically dependent upon the export of natural resources and technological imports. So the import is cut off. the exports are changing in an interesting way. And again, it's not necessarily the governments, it's the oil companies. They're not buying.
Oh.
And so, the U.S. says it's not going to buy Russian oil. The U.K. says they're going to decrease Russian oil by the end of the year.
Oh, thanks, UK.
But the companies aren't waiting for that. They're just not buying now.
Okay.
And so, that's one of the reasons that Russia gets starved for cash. So, again, it's a battle between the Russian economy and whether it could be propped up by rising oil prices, which aren't rising as fast as they were.
Now they're declining.
Versus the sanctions, which aren't going away. Meanwhile, as he points out, we're having acts of sabotage, such as British dockers refusing to unload Russian tankers. Wow. 7 of them are already rejected service by the docker unions. If continental Europeans team up, it'll create a major problem for Russian exports. But even without exports stopping completely, severing technological import from the West will disrupt Russian technological chains. Yeah. Russian factories use Western industrial machines. They use details, technologies, IT products, Cisco computer systems, for example. And so you shut that off, and all of a sudden you got a problem.
Yeah.
So China may come in and try to make that up, but it'll take them years, just like it'll take the U.S. years to build enough capacity to send a lot of liquefied natural gas over to Europe and have Europe get ready to accept it and start using that instead of Russian oil. It's not that simple. You can't just flip a switch. You got to build stuff to make that happen.
We could put it on Craigslist.
That's by the way,
have
that's
to come
jobs.
Pick it up. Yeah, right, true.
Jobs in this country too. If you start making LNG facilities and expanding them, that's jobs. Jobs are always good.
Dirty, smelly jobs, but they are jobs.
Better gas than oil.
I guess so.
And better renewables than gas. Build them all for us. But if you're going to also build those so you can send them to Europe, so Europe can become less dependent upon the Russian economy, that's fine.
Sure. Just don't do the windmills. They don't work.
Yeah, well, he was into that too. So, it's a pretty broad brush explanation of what's going on. As that happens, here's a piece in the Washington Post. Russia's imminent default would be catastrophic, and here's why. Moscow's credit has been reduced to junk status as international financial sanctions cut off much of the nation's revenue. So it's not imagination. It's not fake news. Russia's really in trouble financially. And, they can just say, okay, fine, we're not going to pay. But that has all sorts of other ramifications.
Yeah, in years past, other countries would beat up on you. But now we don't.
So Russia's finance ministry said, well, it's the West that won't get paid, so it's your problem.
It's a thought.
As if that fixes everything.
Yeah, I mean, okay. We're prepared for that. And I think we'll absorb it a little bit better than they do, especially if we continue to trade with one another. But, okay. I mean, there'll be some people, I guess, who feel something, but it's not me. No Russians are paying me.
Right. Now, companies, they'll do that for 3 weeks, and then they'll turn around and say, okay, well, now we think we can make some money, so we're back quietly.
Right. You wait for the Big Macs
to
show
up. For now, they're doing what they need to do. And if you want some good news, there is some bipartisan support for what Biden is doing here. Jill Lawrence has an interesting, unfortunately, behind a paywall column in the USA Today. From Ukraine to the mail, we're in a golden bipartisan era. Give thanks while it lasts, which may only be a few weeks.
Our mail?
The break from the usual strife will no doubt be fleeting, but Democrats, listen up. If the two parties can make deals, there could be hope for you.
Oh, boy. All right.
Okay. For example, Joe Biden has managed to unite an increasingly broad swath of Americans and the world, from economic and information warfare to keeping Ukrainians supplied with what they need to keep fighting with no U.S. forces on the ground or in the sky. There's extensive bipartisan support for the ban on Russian oil imports, as the House quickly demonstrated with a 414-17 vote to approve the ban.
Okay.
Toughen the sanctions law and require a review of Russia's membership in the World Trade Organization. Meanwhile, the Senate passed the Postal Service Reform Act, 79-19.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
That's the Senate we're talking about here.
Right. They did.
Remember the days where you don't talk about filibuster because you don't need to?
Like now.
Now. In the works for 15 years, it sailed through the House last month and is headed to Biden's desk. What does it mean? Guaranteed 6-day-a-week mail delivery, online performance dashboard, and steps to make sure the Postal Service doesn't go broke. So that must mean they're looking at their pensions.
Good. Okay. Great.
Requirements to,
they can invest it in Sberbank.
Well, if all of that happens, then you don't need LaJoy. Remember, a lot of the Fire LaJoy stuff was, we got to hold this up until we get this postal reform stuff done. It's done.
So, yeah, and maybe he's
tomorrow.
ready to go himself at that point. I'd like to get this done.
I did what I needed to do. I can retire now. Good. Bye.
Yeah.
And then there's a historic bipartisan package to keep the government running through September 30th. That was done.
Oh.
Now, interestingly.
It's supposed to have been done last April, but okay.
Yeah, but it's done.
Yeah, it's done now. That's the end of the fiscal year, so there will be no more CRs.
Right.
Well, that's not necessarily
quietly
true.
done, but, you don't talk about it when it works. You only talk about it when it doesn't work.
No more CRs this fiscal year. We can still do a CR first thing next fiscal year. That happens. Okay.
Major bipartisan achievement for a competitive with China bill that's happening. A coalition to ban stock trades. That was quite a long list here.
Yeah, that's an effective stretch, and I guess I don't know. I guess maybe European invasions
on working for sexual harassment in the workplace, meaning that you take that out of arbitration and you allow it to go to the court system.
Okay. Yeah, well, that's
bipartisan.
Okay, fine.
So that's all good news among the bad news.
I'm sure there were some people who said, I have bipartisan support for sexual harassment. I'm for that. Sure, absolutely. I'll get it.
Well, one party is, but,
Right, so they were fooled into voting for it. All right, well, so some progress was made. All you have to do is distract with a major European war. I had no idea.
Yeah, and the bad news is there's no baseball. But,
well, okay. We'll see if we can work on that. Maybe the Japanese can get into the war, and we'll see if we can get that done.
Right.
Sup fam, it's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We continue with our World News Roundup with Greg Dworkin, and we talked about what we were going to do, and I forgot. What was it?
Well, we were talking about bipartisanship, and it does have its limits.
Sure.
There's a piece, Manu Raju and Alex Rogers in CNN. Lisa Murkowski, she's got a tough Supreme Court choice. A different game. Why is it a different game? Because she's running for re-election, and she'll be primaried by somebody who is really Trumpy.
Wow, okay.
If she votes for Jackson, she's bound to give fresh ammunition to a Trump-backed challenger trying to remove her from the seat she's held for the past 2 decades. But if she opposes Jackson, she'll be accused of reversing course to insulate herself from campaign attacks.
Yes. That is
so
true.
We don't know what she's going to do. She's better off just voting for her reluctantly and then making sure Democrats continue to vote for her, and that's how she wins. But, there's a lot to be played out in the meantime.
All right.
So the House, generally iron-ruled by Nancy Pelosi, had some true disarray the other day.
Oh, no, I can't believe it.
They were trying to get the omnibus bill, the $1.5 trillion bill toward averting a government shutdown done, which they did. But in order to do that, they had to pull out some COVID relief. And the reason they had to do that is because, for reasons which are unclear, the COVID relief for the country was taken from COVID relief for the states. And the individual state representatives said, wait a minute, you can't do that.
Okay.
We're not happy with that, so they dropped it altogether.
Unspent funds being?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Well,
so you're taking unspent funds from me to give to some guy in Texas. I'm not having it. I'm from Ohio.
Well, you were supposed to spend that. And why are you so possessive of it if you weren't going to spend it?
More than a dozen House Democrats, according to Politico, from across the ideological spectrum, balked at proposed offsets for nearly $16 billion in COVID relief funds, including the bill. Why? Because the funds would have come out of their state's pandemic money. Mm-hmm. Now, a dozen House Democrats, when you have a 4-seat majority, mean it's not going anywhere.
Yeah, I guess. That's not a lot, a dozen, and ordinarily.
And that gave the Senate a chance to say, oh, the House, the House. House can't get anything done. We're the grown-ups here.
Oh, of course. Sure. All right. Well, you're supposed to have spent that money. That's, by the way,
in the middle of
the
Ukraine war and a pandemic, does anybody really care? No. So that's the only, upside.
Okay, that's true.
Right. The only reason you know about this is I'm telling you, otherwise you wouldn't even know.
Right.
The general public doesn't read Politico to find out whether the Senate's mad at the House today and for why.
That's true. Or not the nitty-gritty of policy decisions anyway. So, okay, we'll tell you. That's good.
Yeah. Anyway, on a different front here, Lawrence Glickman has an interesting discussion of an article by Dave Weigel in the Washington Post. The article is An Emerging GOP Agenda, Fight the Enemy Within.
Huh. Yeah, you would have to. Okay.
Right? But not their enemy.
Oh.
Right, not within the Republican Party, the Trumpers. That's not what they're talking about.
Oh, that's what I thought. Okay.
It's time to declare a new war on crime that won't stop until the carnage stops, said Tom Cotton.
The carnage.
A few hours earlier, on the other side of the country, Ron DeSantis defended legislation that would ban discussion of sexual orientation and gender identity for public school students until 3rd grade. We're going to make sure parents can send their kid to kindergarten without having some of this stuff injected into the schools.
Some of this stuff.
Yeah. The overall strategy is to portray America's problems as fixable, created by left-wing malcontents who hate the country.
Oh.
And Lawrence Glickman points out, I wrote a book, part of which is about the development of this vocabulary between the 20s and the 70s. Clearly, the GOP is still drawing from that tattered but effective playbook. For example, Eric Greitens, is that how he pronounces his name?
I think so.
Claimed the greatest threat to our country exists right now, and that's a version of the 5 minutes to midnight rhetoric.
Oh.
Right? We cannot afford to postpone this program much longer. The free enterprise system, once lost, cannot be easily regained. If the government continues to increase its powers at the expense of the people, we shall go down into the totalitarian pit, and the next generation will struggle in darkness to rise. If we're to make tomorrow better than today, we shall have to act fast. It's getting late. It's just about 5 minutes to midnight.
I see.
Wendell Willkie.
Yeah.
1940, about the New Deal.
Yeah, which was terrible, by the way. Oh, boy, did it create a depression.
Right, stress on domestic enemies is also completely in keeping with the tradition, as I wrote on page 105 of my book. Even during the height of the Cold War, free enterprisers pronounced the danger of internal enemies much more pressing than the threat of the foreign enemies. So Tim Scott's claim that the, quote, militant left has now seized control of our economy, our culture, and our country is very much in keeping with the conflation of moderate liberalism with socialism and totalitarianism that I trace in my book. Free Enterprise in American History is the name of the book.
Well,
and so he's just saying, what comes around goes around.
Several times, apparently.
Several times.
So, okay. I thought the real danger, first of all, don't be in Eric Greitens' house near midnight. That's true.
Yeah. Don't let him let you into the bedroom.
Go down
don't
to
put the handcuffs on.
Don't go down in the basement. Don't do anything. So I don't know what he had to do with it, but how did he get in it? Why was he in there? What was he doing?
Because, he's running for Senate, I guess.
Okay.
In Missouri, and he's using the same language that DeSantis and others, and like Thomas Massey, are using around the country.
Okay. I see where he was doing that now.
Don't pay attention to the fact that January 6th was like the biggest thing, and we had this guy who was the head of our party who tried to keep Javelin missiles from Zelensky, and sided with Putin against Ukraine, even though everybody's on Ukraine's side. Don't pay attention to that. What's really important are the radical leftists who are pushing Biden to nominate judges that Lisa Murkowski is going to have to vote against.
Yes, except that she'll vote for them.
Well, there's a lot that's flawed in their analysis, but there's no question that that's what they're doing.
Yes, I have been. It's been great since I seized control of the economy, though. I must admit, having complete control of all the money. I don't know why I don't have any of it, but having control of it.
That's why you're buying foreign teas.
Right. Well, that's true. Or somebody in this house is. I'm going to impose some sanctions just as soon as I get done with it.
Right. Here's a little, getting back to the Russian situation, this is a little tweet thread from David Frum. It's short.
Okay.
Unlike the super lengthy one the other
he does
fellow contributed, but it's good. No Russian leader since Tsar Nicholas II, and now we know about that because we just reviewed the Russo-Japan War. No Russian leader since Tsar Nicholas II has done his country so much harm so fast as Vladimir Putin. He's isolated Russia from world trade, made the ruble worthless, destroyed 25 years of economic gains in a week.
Very efficient.
Yeah, pretty good. Putin laid waste to the Russian economy in support of a failed war of aggression against neighboring Ukraine. Russia has lost thousands of soldiers, wrecked masses of equipment, committed massively, publicly, war crimes without achieving any of its military objectives. But Putin can't call it quits. If he quits now, he quits in defeat and humiliation. We saw what happened to the Tsar when that happened.
Why not just lie?
That cannot end well for him, so he'll seek to negotiate something that can be presented as a victory. But what can there be that offsets something that was worth burning 25 years of Russian development in 10 days? Putin already had Crimea, already had his bits of eastern Ukraine, and now he's going to be negotiating from a position of worsening weakness. And the deal he gets today is way worse than the deal he could have gotten last week, and the deal he gets next week is going to be worse than the deal today. So the shifts required to restore peace aren't subtle. The shifts required are big, and diplomats will commit time and ingenuity devising formulas to meet Putin's ego needs, and all the while that ego will devour human lives, leaving devastation and waste behind. So like you, I'll follow the diplomatic news breathlessly, eager for signs of progress, but, don't expect much.
Maybe. I mean, it's a plausible thing, although I guess it depends on, I don't know. I'm wondering why can't Putin lie to the Russian populace and say he won?
Well, that's...
You should try that, Vlad.
We've been talking about that since the Vietnam War. Just declare victory and leave.
Right. And then he's in a better position to do it. Right now, at the moment, apparently...
We showed Ukraine what would happen if they denazify, so now they won't. And the fact that you can't find a single Nazi in Ukraine right now is proof that we succeeded.
Right.
So let's get out.
Look around. I don't see any Nazis. Do you? Success. Right. And they do have control. They remain in control of much of eastern Ukraine. I don't see why Frum thinks that he has to give that back. Right. So, why not? They actually have... I think Frum has got it backwards in terms of the territorial story. They've gained more territory. If they gave that back, they could still hold on to the two regions that they called breakaways and
plus Crimea. But, the other side of the coin
had that.
Is that,
no Big Macs.
Just like in 1904, 1905, it wasn't that big a defeat, but it loomed tremendously because it broke the mythos of inevitable, unstoppable Russia.
Well, their problem was it broke that mythos inside Russia. And if it breaks the mythos elsewhere, I think he might be okay. But if it's inside Russia, everybody is convinced that they did a great job. Maybe it's enough. Remember, he only has, the Putin regime only has to last as long as Putin does. He doesn't care what happens after.
Well, even if he does, he doesn't.
Right.
Because that's how it works.
Oh, okay.
You can't care about it.
I said right, and I don't even know what that means. But okay, it sounded good. So right.
Anyway, we'll finish up with a different piece altogether, a piece by Ed Young in The Atlantic. How did this many deaths become normal? The U.S. is nearing 1 million recorded COVID deaths without the social reckoning that such a tragedy should provoke.
Yes.
And why is that?
Why?
And he's got some reasons. First of all, to grapple with the aftermath of a disaster, there has to be an aftermath. but we have the coronavirus pandemic still ongoing.
Ah, okay.
I mean, every day we lose as many people as 9/11.
That's true. That's math, too. It's not aftermath. It's still math.
It's so big we can't put our arms around it anymore. Thinking about it is like staring into the sun, and after 2 years, you look away. As tragedy becomes routine, excess deaths feel less excessive. Levels of suffering that once felt like thunderclaps now resemble a metronome, the background noise against which everyday life plays. He's a good writer. Yeah. The same inexorable inuring happened a century ago. In 1920, the U.S. was hit by a fourth wave of the Great Flu pandemic that had begun 2 years earlier. But even as people died in huge numbers, nobody responded, wrote John Barry, a historian of the 1918 flu, the best flu book you can get. People were weary of influenza, and so were public officials. Newspapers were filled with frightening news about the virus, and nobody cared.
Oh.
Also, fatalism has been stoked by failure. 2 successive administrations floundered at controlling the virus, and both ultimately shunted the responsibility to do so onto individuals. Vaccine brought hope, which was dashed as uptake stagnated. Other protections were prematurely rolled back. Delta variant arrived, and during that wave, parts of the South and Midwest experienced a shocking level of death. As Martha Lincoln, a medical anthropologist at San Francisco State University, told me in September 2020, if salvation never comes, people are going to harden into a fatalistic sense that we have to accept whatever the risks are to continue with our everyday lives.
Yes, they
right?
are.
If you can't do anything about it, then suck it up and live with it.
All right. I mean, I don't mind. I'll wear the mask.
Richard Keller, a medical historian at the University of Wisconsin at Madison, says that much of the current pandemic rhetoric, premature talk of endemic, focus on comorbidity, from COVID or with COVID, treats COVID deaths as dismissible and inevitable so that you don't need to have precautions. It's like gun violence.
Yes.
Right? You just don't talk about it.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing you can do about it. So what's the point? I got other things. But let's focus on things we can do something about.
Right. Right, sure. Why not? Whether it's gun violence, generally school shootings.
So if 1,000 deaths a day isn't acceptable, what threshold would be? And the extreme answer is none. Well, that can't be because COVID's long past the point where eradication is possible. So the measures that protected people from COVID slashed adult deaths from flu, all but eliminated them among children. So the deaths part was good. Our acceptance of those deaths never accounted for alternatives. When I was offered the choice between having a society where you're expected to go into work when you're ill or having fewer people die of the flu, which do you pick?
Traditionally?
You go to work. Yeah. There's presenteeism, we used to call it.
It's
not absenteeism, it's presenteeism. You're expected to be present.
Take day call.
Unless you're dying, you have to come in. If you get everybody else sick, that's just the price you pay.
Mm-hmm. That's generally was the case until they died.
So there's still time, but, not paying attention is popular. And so when CDC or Biden are accused of playing politics, it's tough not to.
Yeah,
it's not that the officials don't want to acknowledge that COVID is bad and that you need to do stuff. It's that the country doesn't. And it doesn't matter how strong a leader is. If the parade doesn't follow you, you're not leading.
That's true, too.
So very it's strongly frustrating. So the best thing to do, in my view, is to do the right thing. But what happens when you tell a politician you need to do the right thing.
Sure.
Someone else will look at them and say, wow, that's really courageous.
Yeah, and then attack.
And you know what that means. That means you're going to lose.
You're next on the chopping block. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
so that's the state of the state. It's not that the pandemic has receded from killing people. It's that it's receded from the news because it's the same old every day. And just like you don't talk about January 6th or why Trump was impeached for trying to choose Putin over Zelensky, because the news just doesn't do that. You can say they should, but they don't.
Yeah.
People don't talk about the pandemic every day because they want to move on and they would like to pretend that it's not really involving them, which of course it is.
So. Well, it's involving 1 million of them anyway, at minimum. I guess we'll have a small round of attention paid to it when the papers decide that whatever measure it is by which they're doing their counting, today's the day to run the 1 million story.
Yeah, but then it's a story for a day.
Yeah,
and then you
right.
go on.
I mean, just as it was a story for a day, I believe when it was 100,000, the New York Times ran the front page thing. What was it? Incalculable loss.
Right. Okay. So I can't calculate it, so I'm not going to try.
You could calculate it. I mean, they had the number. And as it turns out, now you can calculate the number by multiplying that by 10. And interestingly, it will get 1/10 the attention that 100,000 got. And I don't know. I guess, maybe that's an effect of the vaccine, too, is that people say, well, we don't have to join the ranks of the dead. You could take the vaccine, and if you don't, you don't. And maybe it's not such a bad thing that we stop caring about people dying if they're intentionally ignoring or denying the efficacy of the vaccine. But it's hard to get used to. That's for sure.
Yeah, I'm of this school that it doesn't matter whether you're vaccine resistant or not. A death's a death, and it's a death whether you're with the vaccine or without the vaccine.
That's true. Or with or from. I guess that's true. You could give them space on that. If you differentiate between with or from, though, then I'm going to differentiate between why you refuse the vaccine.
Well, I think that's something you
you
should put to the test. Why don't you get your vaccine and we'll see whether it's with or from.
Okay.
But the important thing is you get the vaccine first so you can be part of that experiment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Otherwise, you're just, I
don't really care if you didn't get it. You're not in a position to really talk about it. But if you got it, then you can tell me what happens.
It's like,
right. And I'm willing to listen. Just get the vaccine first, and then you can talk.
That's a better thing. Why don't we just do it that way? It's like if you said clip instead of magazine, you're disqualified from the discussion. If you haven't gotten the vaccine, you can't talk about it.
You're not qualified to talk about vaccines.
There you go. All right, I like that one better. I don't know if it'll work, but what can you do? Just as long as we get everybody who didn't take the vaccine in Hagerstown and leave them there, then I'm okay with it.
During a rainstorm. Because they won't do their thing during a rainstorm.
Right. So everybody in the neighborhood who's opposed to that but has a garden hose, just keep the sprinkler running and they'll never leave. Right.
So it's a big nothing, that People's Convoy, just so you know.
Yes, they quit yesterday because of rain. And Saturday is supposed to be terrible weather around here, so I don't know. Maybe they'll just go home. It'll be the weekend. They'll bug out.
Costing them a fortune, so it'll be interesting to see what happens.
I did see another trucker who said he was quitting because 3 girls in a car gave him the finger. Well,
not just that. If you get paid in rubles, it's not worth much.
Yeah. Right.
That's the real effect. The dropping of trolls on Twitter, the lack of obnoxious stuff that you used to see so much more of because now Russia can't pay for it. And all of a sudden, all those strange people who you never heard of with lots of numbers after their name are gone.
Right.
Because if they're not going to pay you in Kazakhstan, why should you do that? We don't do this for fun. It's a living.
Yep. It's if the check's not coming, they'll find somebody else who can pay. All those numbers after their names, by the way, is the new exchange rate for the ruble.
Yeah, exactly.
That's how you can tell. So, who else has money like that they can start spending? It was rumored for a long time that the Iranians and Chinese would start doing things like this, but I have not seen them as active. We all still think it's the Russians, although, who knows? Disguise yourself as a Russian and we'll pay you. Well,
the old joke about rubles, right? A Russian boy asks his father, "Daddy, can I have 5 rubles to buy something at the store?" And his father says, 20 rubles? What do you need 50 rubles for?
In the space of the conversation.
Yep.
True. All right. Well, there's less McDonald's to spend their money on, so maybe prices will begin coming down. I don't know whether we're doing them a favor, cutting them off from the Shamrock Shake, or making them mad, but I don't know if they do that there necessarily. But yes, I did see somebody else pointing out why we're supposed to be punishing the Russians, not making them healthier. I don't understand what we're doing. But, I guess if your choice is borscht, I don't know. Maybe it's not so bad to have McDonald's instead.
Mm.
Well, too bad. You're not going to get it. All right. Anything else that we need to shoehorn in here? I know I've got a bunch of things, but...
no.
Okay. That's it for the week. Screw the rest of it.
I'll see you Monday.
Okay, well, we'll do that, and so long as it's all just saber rattling, we'll be fine, and no nuclear strikes in between then and now. It doesn't make any real sense, but you never know with this guy. Just keep your fingers crossed. Okay, well, we can do things again on Monday and catch up then. Let's see, the other, I can fill the space with a couple of quick hits that I picked up on Twitter this morning. I guess in the file under modern warfare and modern technology and all the weird things that are, some of which are just unconfirmed rumors, like everybody using, what was it, the dating apps when stationed on the front lines and giving away their locations. Another interesting thing, and I guess this goes back to the no-fly zone difficulty issue. Nolan Peterson, who is says a war reporter based in Ukraine since 2014, like when the actual war began, tweets this news. Ukrainian soldier on the front lines in eastern Ukraine told me that Russian Orlan 10 drones, or one of them anyway, Russian Orlan 10 drone. Let's look up what they look like. I'm just sort of curious about what the size of these things. It bears on the story if you hang on for just a second. Okay, so it's a pretty small-ish thing. Like they were, anyway, but it's sort of airplane shaped as opposed to the helicopter type drones. But anyway, the word was here. Let's get back to Nolan's tweet. A Russian Orlan 10 drone was orbiting over his position, this Ukrainian soldier said, to target howitzer artillery fire, resulting in multiple Ukrainian fatalities and wounded. He stressed the need for more anti-aircraft systems. Not a no-fly zone per se, but anti-aircraft systems. Now, why is that a problem and what makes it an interesting modern warfare issue? Oh, and if I had just scrolled down on the same page, I would have seen pictures of these drones in use. And they look like miniature, like World War II era propeller planes. And I was thinking this morning, like the helicopter style ones, because although he says orbiting over my position, so I guess he's flying in circles around. But I was thinking more like the helicopter ones hovering over. But the idea, they're spotting for for artillery. That's why I was going in that direction. Artillery fire and helping target it. And that's not new per se. Usually it's something, in the old days you did do it from the air, but a manned aircraft. Now a drone will do it. So again, talking about no-fly zones. These smaller drones are much harder to spot, and although you probably have mixed results, I'm just guessing, mixed results of picking them up and targeting them like on radar. And I mean, they're small, and it seems like quite honestly, it's a waste of firepower and ordnance to knock a thing like that out of the sky with like a air-to-air missile, if that's even possible. I mean, I don't think they put out much of a heat signature either, now that I'm thinking about it, right? So the heat-seeking guidance on most air-to-air missiles not probably terribly effective. The other problem is, even if the thing is up there flying around, like if it was one of those helicopter ones that I was thinking of this morning, it's like it's a low dollar or low ruble investment to put something like that up there because they're unmanned and it's pretty small and easily replicable technology. So, one drone, the cost of losing a drone for spotting, one machine gun nest or one Ukrainian army position so that you can shell it more accurately is a pretty decent trade-off. As opposed to, the multi-million-dollar, billion-dollar unmanned drones with missiles on them that we tend to use in patrolling the Middle East and blowing up weddings, things like that, right? But then I was thinking about the helicopter type one. If it's just hovering over you, there's, I'm sure, an enormous temptation to try and shoot it down, which unless, you have some real discipline among the troops, you might say, if it's hovering straight over your head and you try to shoot it down, what's going to happen to the bullets? Right, exactly. So you don't want to do that. They'll rain straight back down on you. If you can get an angle and you know that there's nobody in the field of fire, going forward, fine, that's one thing. But firing straight up isn't going to do it. Now, if you're talking about a miniature airplane style drone that's flying circles around you, even more difficult to shoot down from the ground. But I don't even know what kind of anti-aircraft systems exist and are ready to ship to Ukraine. And however we'd have to do it, we'd have to pretend they were Polish or whatever and ship them that way. I don't know what you can do to knock those things down. But just a change in modern warfare with cheap miniature drones as opposed to unmanned attack aircraft. A new development and something to worry about. I guess if you're on the front lines in Ukraine, anyway. So there was that. Let's see, what other interesting developments? Some stupid Trump news. Why don't we throw that one in there? Donald Trump apparently yesterday had a close scrape flying somewhere. I was very disappointed to see the headline. Plane carrying Donald Trump made emergency landing in New Orleans after engine failure over Gulf of Mexico. The disappointing part, of course, that they made the emergency landing. I was looking for plane carrying Donald Trump nearly misses with emergency landing and crashes into the Gulf of Mexico, and we're all free, finally. But no such luck, and naturally won't be interpreted as a warning from God or anything like that. Instead, it's being used as a fundraising opportunity because Donald Trump is involved. But apparently, the plane he was on, and I'm not clear whether it was one of his own private jets, or I think I heard somebody else saying he might have been borrowing a private jet from somebody else. Apparently, his fleet of private jets, having been mothballed during his presidency, like Russian mobile artillery and trucks being used in the invasion of Ukraine, were not properly maintained for many years and have significant troubles with their engines and airframes and are in many cases grounded. But at any rate, he had to land. They had some engine failure in the plane that was carrying him, and now he's circulating a letter to his supporters. He's actually trying to raise money for a new, as he calls it, Trump Force One, the billionaire who needs, grassroots fundraising to afford a new private jet. Sure. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So yeah, just skimming through this thing. I don't think we have to read the entirety of the article, but the plane he was on, I don't know. He was on his way. I guess he did an event in New Orleans, and when leaving New Orleans, they had the engine failure. They turned around and went back and landed there. So all fine. It was him, a couple of his advisors. It didn't say which ones so far in the article. And then, of course, the Secret Service that has to tag along with him wherever he goes. The plane itself that they were on belonged to a donor who loaned it to Trump for the evening, according to people familiar with the matter. The plane's tail number was linked to a Utah-based company that is the trustee for more than 1,400 planes. So I guess it's not that easy to identify the owner. The donor's identity, in fact, could not be immediately verified. At any rate, so now he's out there fundraising, apparently, based on this. Whose tweet did I see that was talking about this? SV Date had a whole tweet thread on this episode, including his questioning, doesn't Trump have his own Cessna jet apart from the big broken 757, that the mothballed one that I was telling you about? Why is he flying on some donor's plane when he has his own? And no one knows for sure. He just loves to mooch off of people, I guess. But then we get this message a little bit later on. This just hit the inbox. I don't know what. It's a screen grab of Trump from, is this on his Truth Social thing or something? I don't know. Facebook, who knows? Update, Trump Force One. And then in red, official update on Trump Force One, which doesn't exist, and who cares? And anyway, friend, do you remember Trump Force One? They love saying Trump Force One. It's a very, it's not a lot of text here in this screen grab, but just just for a second here, if you don't mind. Update Trump Force 1. 1. Official update on Trump Force 1. 2. Friend, do you remember Trump Force 1? 3. Before becoming the greatest president of all time, I traveled the country in my plane, known as Trump Force 1. That's 4. I have a very important update. I had it, and then I lost it, and then I had it again. Now I have it. I have a very important update on my plane, but I need to trust that you won't share it with anyone. That's why I'm emailing everybody in America. My team is building a brand new Trump Force 1. That's 5. And then it gets cut off here. But then the letter, the greeting, and then 1, 2, 3 sentences, and we have 5 mentions of Trump Force 1 in there. And you're supposed to pay for it. That's the deal, essentially. So he's crowdsourcing some part of Trump Force 1. And why not, right? Otherwise, he'd have to pay for a plane himself or use campaign money to pay for the plane, and he'd rather use that for other things. And idiots will pay for his plane instead, and he'd be happy to have them do that. And as one Twitter wag had put it, who was it? The Volatile Mermaid, who is the oh no she twitn't person. She's been around quite a while, making cracks like this. But this is true. There are Americans dumb enough to complain about gas prices while donating money to an alleged billionaire for a new private plane, in case you wondered why we haven't been able to stop the spread of COVID in this country yet. So there you go. That's where we stand on the private plane thing with him. Let's see. Yes, right. Also here is the Thomas Massey tweet about the, again, biolabs, whatever they may be. And I don't even know if I really want to uncover the origin of that. It might be too murky, the origins of that, without getting into, down the rabbit hole of right-wing weirdness. What other things have I put aside here? It's difficult to tell. We've got to open up each one of these tweets. Is this something I can move to? Yes. Well, Ukraine related. A grab from NYC Southpaw, who has picked up on the tweet of Alexander Panetta, the Washington correspondent of CBC News. And the question is, do we mean Canadian Broadcasting News, or is it the Christian Broadcasting Company? Which one is that? I can't. I'm not certain for sure. Ex Politico, so it could be either one. I don't know. But the Washington correspondent for CBC News. Let me open up his Twitter profile and see if we can't make more sense of it. He's a verified guy, so I don't know. I mean, do you Canadians recognize his name? Anyway, this it doesn't really matter. I've given it all I can by reading what's there. Here's the real part that I was interested in. Southpaw picks up Panetta's tweet about how Republicans are breaking down over the Ukraine situation, and reports Republican voters are massively siding with Ukraine versus Russia in this conflict, according to polls, contrary, to what the click industry takes. For starters, this survey showing they favor Ukraine, and he spells it F-A-V-O-U-R, so now we know Canadian Broadcasting, not Christian Broadcasting, because they wouldn't stand for the unchristian spelling with a U in there. For starters, this survey is showing they favor Ukraine, accuse Russia of war crimes, and see Putin as a liar. So there you go. And as a matter of fact, does this tell us that it's also Canada? Because the URL he's pointing to here is docs.cdn.ugov.com. Does that mean it was a Canadian poll, or is the CDN just random or means something else? Anyway, screenshots from it show that the Economist YouGov poll of U.S. citizens, so I don't know why the CDN. I guess that means something else. It's probably some computerese and everybody's laughing. Anyway, what do we got here? What's the question? I don't know. It's weird. It just says Russia, Ukraine, neither, not sure. Is this like who do you support? I don't know. This is a very poorly labeled piece. So anyway, it doesn't matter. I will just take his word for it and just say, in his reading, Republicans are massively siding with Ukraine versus Russia. NYC Southpaw commenting, I suspect a lot of Republican voters know that Trump is in a different, much more pro-Putin place, having heard him call the invasion genius and all. So it'll be interesting to see whether this persists. And interestingly, I think it's a big switch possibly, but I don't know if there was a lot of polling in the very initial part of the war that would have demonstrated anything other than that. But it's kind of interesting that, maybe we assumed too much because Trump was remaining pro-Putin that rank and file Republicans would follow him there and then regain their senses. Maybe they just immediately were like, it's just embarrassing, and then they just refused to talk about it instead. But anyway, I think that's an interesting development, and we'll have to see where he lands on that one and whether he has, engines on his plane when he tries to land. He's already backpedaling, as many politicians around the world are. As a matter of fact, let's see, somewhere buried here for the last couple of days, I have not gotten back to this, but I think we may have make some mention of this. Greg, I feel like, brought it up. And I think maybe so when we were talking about what was going on in France. A piece from, unsigned from the editorial board of the Washington Post back on March 4th. Right-wing nationalists backpedal as Putin's Ukraine war worsens, and it's happening everywhere, I guess. For years, right-wing nationalist politicians pronounced a dewy-eyed admiration for Russia's Vladimir Putin, a strongman they couldn't resist. It wasn't only Donald Trump who rhapsodized about Mr. Putin's supposed strength and traditional values. It was also the leaders of similarly inclined movements in La France, right? In France, Italy, Hungary, the Czech Republic, and elsewhere. And I can't do any of those accents, so fine. Many of those leaders have now been knocked off balance by Mr. Putin's scorched earth campaign in Ukraine. Heedless of the Russian leader's previous acts of murderous brutality against Ukraine, but also Georgia and various Russian dissidents who crossed him, Chechens, everywhere else that he's invaded, etc., etc. The current carnage has triggered a backpedaling stampede. For many Europeans, in particular, the unfolding barbarity in Ukraine, alarmingly nearby, has placed nationalist parties and politicians in an unflattering and clarifying new light. In France, ahead of national elections last month, right-wing politician Marine Le Pen has been embarrassed by a photograph of her shaking hands with Mr. Putin, featured in more than 1 million pamphlets recently printed by her National Rally Party. So she did it to herself. We spent, I don't know how much, because it's in francs or maybe euros. I don't know how they paid. And 1 million pamphlets, that's got to be pretty costly. And now, don't use those, right? Ms. Le Pen, who previously supported Mr. Putin's annexation of Crimea, part of Ukraine, of course, after her party took a 9 million euro loan, I knew it was euros, from a Russian bank, by the way, to finance her 2017 presidential campaign, which I can't believe that actually flew there. I mean, she didn't win, but still. And I'm sure that convinced some people not to vote for her and her party. But okay. She previously supported Putin's annexation of Crimea after her party took a 9 million euro loan from a Russian bank to finance her 2017 presidential campaign. Could plausibly have been regarded as a Russian asset by Moscow. By the way, I'm going to look into that linked story about the loan and see just out of curiosity, which bank? Does it say gave her the loan? I'm just kind of curious. In my scan, it doesn't seem to have the name, but you would think that would come up early on, right? I was just wondering, is it Sberbank? Is it Alpha? I'm curious about that. Let's see. Like salons. Okay. Does it really not say anywhere? This can't be right. I must have missed it up at the beginning. Anyway, maybe it's not that important, but I was hoping to, see a name I recognize and see it quickly. But it doesn't appear to... Is it not in here at all? That can't be right. Here's a picture. Okay, well, there's a branch of the first Czech-Russian bank in Moscow in 2016. Is a picture with a caption. So I guess that suggests that this is the bank that they're talking about, and that one we haven't heard about yet for whatever reason. So, well, that's of some interest. Anyway, okay, we'll jump back to the other article. So as they took out the loan, that was pretty serious. It made her look like a Russian asset. As recently as last month, she parroted the Kremlin's denials that Putin planned to invade Ukraine, saying she didn't believe a bit of it. I don't see what would be their interest there, she declared, and that's going to make you look like maybe you're not ready to be president of your country. Her eyes having been opened, she now asserts the invasion is unjustifiable. Another French right-winger, Eric Zemmour, who also, we talked about him the other day and probably mispronounced his name. He also scoffed at the odds of a Russian attack and made no secret of his admiration for Putin, has undergone a similar awakening. By contrast, French President Emmanuel Macron took seriously the threat posed by Mr. Putin's sword rattling and made intensive diplomatic efforts to avert a war as Russian troops massed at Ukraine's borders. His standing in the polls has jumped, and Thursday he announced he would run for a second term. The elections will determine whether French voters reward his perspicacity, do I have that right, and punish his right-wing opponents' witlessness. Hungarians, too. That's right, that dreadful Hungarian.
Dreadful Hungarian?
Yes, exactly. That dreadful Hungarian have been subjected to rhetorical acrobatics by their nationalist Prime Minister, Viktor Orban.
That dreadful Hungarian?
Yes, who never hid his admiration for Mr. Putin, despite his country's membership in NATO. It's a very narrow slice of news that I have for dreadful Hungarian news clip, or audio clip, don't you think? Yeah. Originally for Sebastian Gorka, but it works for Orban as well. Orban, also blind to Putin's intentions, said the Russian president's demands on Ukraine leading up to the invasion were perfectly reasonable. Which brings us back to yesterday's story. That's why he didn't invade during Trump's administration. Trump also thought that Putin's demands on Ukraine, which haven't changed, were entirely reasonable when he was asking for us to give his taking of Ukraine the American imprimatur in the world community. In the United States, Putin's invasion has prompted some Republicans to distance themselves uncharacteristically from Mr. Trump, who termed the Russian leader a genius. Some will have their own explaining to do when confronted with their previous remarks, and Americans will have the chance to judge who did and did not try to delude them about the Russian leader. Just to correct the emphasis there, some will have their own explaining to do when confronted by their previous remarks. That is, some of the people who are now seeking to distance themselves from Trump as Republicans have their own pro-Putin remarks to explain. And they're not going to do very well with it, I can assure you. And the reason I was a little bit confused by that is I think they'll also have explaining to do later when Trump runs for president again, and they all have to realign themselves with him regardless. And by that point, Trump may have forgotten that he's anti-Putin again. He wants to go back to that, I think. And I expect to see that happen I guess over the course of the next year or so as he begins gearing up to run again. All right. Let's see. In fact, speaking of that phenomenon, why don't we follow this train of thought to this Washington Post piece about nutcase Wendy Rogers, the Arizona state senator. Yeah, Wendy Rogers, who I think has probably come to a lot of the attention of a lot of you, especially with her outrageous statements sometimes on Facebook, sometimes on Twitter, but social media. her big tool, and the more outrageous she gets, the more notoriety she gets. And I guess that's part of the plan, and that's what's uncovered here in this Washington Post story. Read a little bit about it so we can bounce around to more stories today. Arizona lawmaker speaks to white nationalists, calls for violence, and sets fundraising records, like as a result. Yes, that's actually what we're talking about here. And I think there was a tweet about this article, now that I think about it, that's probably parked right next to it here. Yeah, that really explains it. Long story short here, the tweet from Tom Jackman, one of the report, is it one of the reporters on this headline or not? Anyway, he's a Washington Post reporter saying, "What a great story. For many years, Wendy Rogers advocated reasonable views." Did you know that? I had no idea. Trying to accomplish things. Then, Trump. Now, the Arizona state senator speaks to white nationalists, calls for violence, and sets fundraising records. And then he attributes the article to others. So I suppose he might not be on this byline after all. And in fact, it is Beth Reinhard and Rosalind Helderman who have written this piece, and it looks to be pretty lengthy. I'm curious about what her old views used to be like, but we'll see if we can get to them quickly. Midway through a white nationalists conference in Orlando last month, one speaker drew applause, calling for gruesome violence against, quote, traitors, after excoriating critics of the, quote, honorable Confederate General Robert E. Lee and proponents of the, quote, bioweapon coronavirus vaccine. Do you remember I don't remember that setup, but do you remember the comment, perhaps? "We need to build more gallows," the speaker said, adding that such a deadly fate would, quote, "make an example of these traitors who've betrayed our country." The speech via video at the February 25th conference organized by far-right activist Nick Fuentes, who we just mentioned the other day, right? Oh, finally moving out of his parents' house, right? Who has espoused racist and anti-Semitic views, wasn't from another online agitator or fringe radio host. Rather, it was delivered by Arizona State Senator Wendy Rogers, a Republican lawmaker who represents tens of thousands of constituents and has found a rising national political profile as the face of the radicalized wing of the GOP. Rogers' trajectory shows the political and financial incentives of going to extremes. After losing her earliest races as a mainstream Republican, she moved further and further right until she beat an incumbent by campaigning as the more conservative choice. Now, after a year of fanning bogus allegations about election fraud and other false claims, she is the most successful fundraiser in the Arizona state legislature. And, that's a bad incentive structure. She raised nearly $2.5 million in 2021, outraising even statewide candidates for governor, attorney general, and secretary of state, according to campaign finance records. Nearly $2 million of that money came from small donations from outside Arizona as she traveled the U.S., calling for the 2020 election to be overturned and demanding audits of the vote without credible evidence of fraud. While her support for former President Donald Trump's election falsehoods put her in line with many Republicans, Rogers has moved unapologetically further to the edges of American politics, calling for jailing and executing her political opponents, identifying herself as a member of the Oath Keepers militia group, and attending a conference organized by a group linked to QAnon, the violent anti-government ideology. And I'm glad to see it described that way in the pages of the Post. Her latest speech to Fuentes' group earned her a rare official rebuke from Republicans via a 24-3 Arizona Senate vote to censure her. But she made it clear she believes such blowback only strengthens her message, as she quickly decried the elites for trying to silence her and refused to apologize or back down. And I think I mentioned that those comments from the other day about building the gallows and making sure it's the season to remind her to build it 50 cubits high, and we'll see how it goes. It will be my pleasure to, from now on, we'll use Groggers to drown out her name every time it's mentioned on the show. Let's see. It's pretty interesting. I don't know whether we want to spend all day going back over her record, but I'll leave it for you to explore, I guess. But maybe I'll skip down to the bottom here, or a few paragraphs down, just for a little bit of background on where she came from. This section called No Alarm Bells. A decade before she became known for her scorching rhetoric, Rogers was viewed as a traditional conservative. A retired U.S. Air Force pilot who reached the rank of lieutenant colonel, Rogers once said Arizona Senator John McCain, who died in 2018, inspired her to seek public office. So you can answer for that too. She ran and lost 5 times before she found her message and moment. In her first state Senate race in 2010, she ran on the kind of resume coveted by the political establishment, co-owner of a small business, military veteran, and mother of 2 children. Republican supporters recall an indefatigable campaigner, biking all over the Tempe area district to knock on thousands of doors. Biking. Oh, that's so liberal. Her priorities, according to an archived version of her webpage, create jobs, improve schools, and reduce crime. Her slogan, work hard, follow through. She won endorsements from mainstream business groups. She talked about raising teacher pay and expanding the use of solar energy. She publicized support from Democrats. She was not one to make the kind of polarizing statements she makes now, said political consultant Bert Coleman, who worked on the campaign, which Rogers eventually lost to a Democratic opponent. There were no alarm bells. In 2015, Rogers was an early and enthusiastic supporter of Jeb Bush's presidential campaign, raising enough money to join other bundlers at his family home in Kennebunkport. She tweeted a post story about a Bush campaign event where he attacked Trump for not being a true conservative. But by the spring of 2016, as the former reality television star improbably headed toward the nomination, Rogers had become a loyal Trump supporter. And a lot of people did that. But I guess she just goes further. After 4 more failed congressional bids, she turned her sights back to the state Senate in 2020. Rogers' top priority in 2020, cracking down on, quote, illegals, according to her website. She didn't receive an endorsement from the Arizona Chamber of Commerce as she did in 2010, but she didn't need it to win in 2020. Unlike a decade earlier when she campaigned for a Tempe area seat, Rogers was seeking to represent a more conservative and rural Senate district surrounding Flagstaff. Rogers and her husband own a 2,900 square foot home with a pool in Tempe, according to public records, but since 2015, she has been registered to vote about 160 miles away in Flagstaff, where records show she owns a 700 square foot mobile home. Hey, this is beginning to sound familiar. Anyone with practical logic and an open mind can see that her claim of a legitimate primary residency in Flagstaff is a scam, wrote Gila, County Republican Chairman Gary Morris in a news release during the 2020 campaign. At the time, a Rogers spokesman denounced the attack as a smear and said she lived in Flagstaff and only went to her other home to visit her grandchildren. Sure. Absentee ballots for the primary and general elections that year were mailed to Rogers' Tempe address, according to public records, because her grandchildren wanted to vote, I guess. State law requires candidates to live in the county they represent for at least 1 year before the election, but the rule is rarely enforced, and that's the problem. We never enforce any of these things, and even when we do, we don't. Annoying. Republicans who have watched Rogers over the past decade wonder if her views changed or if she is merely opportunistic. Either way, Rogers' MAGA-charged rants helped her achieve a long elusive victory at the polls. When she first ran, she was nothing like she is today, said Rick Romley, a Republican and former Maricopa County attorney. My wife gives me hell to this day for having supported her. Her shift to the far right has coincided with an outpouring of grassroots small donors. Nearly 40,000 individuals contributed to her campaign last year, of which only a handful gave the $5,300 maximum. That means Rogers can keep dipping into this large pool of donors in 2022. In a feat remarkable for one of 30 state senators, Rogers is outraising statewide incumbents such as Republican Attorney General Mark Brnovich, who is campaigning for U.S. Senate and has raised about $1.8 million. Her 2021 fundraising also surpassed totals collected by other Trump-endorsed contenders in the state, including gubernatorial candidate Lake, mentioned earlier, I guess, so we didn't get the full name, with about $1.5 million, and Secretary of State candidate Mark Fincham with roughly $663,000. Okay, now is as good a time as any to jump back out of the story. I think we got the gist of what's going on here. And, long tradition of this happening. Newt Gingrich himself, cast about all over the place looking for a place to settle where there would be an overwhelmingly Republican majority in a district, and went and did it, but at least he went and lived there. Mark Meadows now renting a shotgun shack somewhere in North Carolina to vote from, and she picked a better residence in Flagstaff. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on At Roots Radio. Let's see, many other things to catch up on, of course. I think we can end our engagement with the Wendy Rogers story at this point, but a very interesting one. Perhaps you want to read the full telling of it to get everything that there is to get out of it. But it reminds me there's a couple other things to jump to as well. New York Times write-up the other day, to jump back to the question of Republicans and their support for Ukraine. I guess now there is some documentary evidence of the big flip. The New York Times write-up from Jonathan Weissman claims to have that news. Republicans, once harsh Ukraine critics, pivot to strong support. Subheader reads, in a matter of weeks, the center of gravity on Ukraine has sharply shifted among Republicans, muffling doubts about U.S. involvement and dismissing questions about the recent past. Let's dive into this just a little bit anyway and take a look. In the final years of Donald Trump's presidency, Republicans portrayed Ukraine as an Eastern European Wild West run by nefarious oligarchs and unlawful politicians, a bad actor that sought to tamper in American elections, and channel millions of dollars to Joe Biden's son. Right. You remember the Republican story for this. And by the way, it's still the Putin position today, which tells you a little bit about where it came from. He still says they're full of corruption and Nazis and yada yada. And gee whiz, if that doesn't sound familiar. We're talking Ukraine, thundered Representative Jim Jordan, Republican of Ohio, in 2019, describing the country as, quote, one of the 3 most corrupt countries on the planet. Okay, the setting was a hearing for Trump's first impeachment, of course, over his efforts to pressure Ukraine's president, Volodymyr Zelensky, into digging up political dirt on Biden. Now such voices are fading as the bulk of the Republican Party tries to get on the right side of history amid a brutal Russian invasion of Ukraine. Republicans are among the most vociferous champions for the United States to amp up its military response, as they always are, and are competing to issue the strongest expressions of solidarity with Ukraine's leaders. Senator Roger Wicker of Mississippi has taken up Zelensky's call for a Western enforced no-fly zone. Senator Rick Scott of Florida said deploying U.S. ground troops to Ukraine should not be off the table. Lindsey Graham encouraged the assassination of Vladimir Putin to save a nation that many in his party had previously portrayed as hardly worth saving. What was sort of a problematic, corrupt place is now the defender of freedom. Graham quipped about his colleagues' changing tune, but he's doing it too. The Republican center of gravity has undergone what Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut, a longtime advocate for the Ukrainian community in his state, called a sea change, a Black Sea change maybe, a swing of the pendulum so sharp that some fear it could lead Congress to unwittingly widen the war. Oh, be careful of that. I am extremely concerned that some of the policies being pushed from policymakers on both sides of the aisle will put us on a path toward a conflict with a nuclear-armed Russia, said Dan Caldwell, the Vice President of Foreign Policy for Stand Together, a group funded by the conservative billionaire Charles Koch, that advocates military restraint. Further complicating issues. In January, as Russia continued to amass more troops near Ukraine's borders, Republicans, including Representatives Matt Rosendale of Montana, Lauren Boebert of Colorado, Paul Gosar, Thomas Massie, Marjorie Trader Green, all weighed in to oppose the United States confronting Russia or to suggest that Biden had malevolent intentions in his handling of the matter. So did Ohio State Senate candidate J.D. Vance and Donald Trump Jr. Now, even the far-right flank seems confused, possibly because of cocaine use, I would say, in the case of some of the aforementioned names. On Monday, Green used her Twitter account to both call one of the whistleblowers in former President Trump's first impeachment, Colonel Vindman, of course, call him a clown who was clueless about Americans being fed up with sending our sons and daughters to die in foreign lands, and to advise, while innocent people are being murdered in Putin's war on Ukraine, the U.S. response is critical. But don't do anything or do send people, or I don't know. That's weird. Tom Cotton, senator from Arkansas, gave a lengthy speech on Monday at the Reagan Presidential Library in California, trying to explain how the party of Reagan, with its aggressive stand against the Soviet Union, could be the same as the party of Trump, which stood by as a president sided with Russia's autocratic president against the judgment of America's intelligence community. Vladimir Putin must pay for this unprovoked naked war of aggression, he concluded. If Joe Biden won't make him pay, the Republican Party must, even though you paved the way. Sure. The Fox News personality Tucker Carlson, one of the last loud voices for isolationism from the conflict, expressed frustration on Monday night with the Republican pivot, saying the party is now more pro-war than Biden. Okay. The ground has definitely shifted, Blumenthal said. Remember, they not only thought of Ukraine as at the bottom of the list of friendly nations for the U.S., but they also put Putin at the top of supposedly friendly leaders. For a distant country on the edge of what was once the Soviet Empire, Ukraine has played an outsized role in American politics for half a dozen years. One of Trump's 2016 campaign managers, Paul Manafort, lobbied on behalf of the country's ousted pro-Russia leader, pressing ahead of the Republican National Convention in 2016 to shift the party's platform away from its support for the country. So he was responsible for the first shift. Remember that the Republican platform at the time was support for Ukraine against Russia, and he switched it to the opposite. Mr. Trump and his supporters tried to deflect attention from Russia's interference on his behalf in the 2016 election by accusing Ukraine of interfering on Hillary Clinton's behalf. Trump's first impeachment grew out of his efforts to withhold military support from Ukraine until Zelensky agreed to investigate Biden and his son Hunter and their involvement in a Ukrainian energy company, Burisma. After every Senate Republican except Mitt Romney voted to acquit Trump, Senators Ron Johnson and Charles Grassley turned the tables and began a formal investigation into whether Biden, as vice president, had tried to pressure Ukrainian authorities to protect his son, who was on the Burisma board. Even some Republicans at the time, like Graham and Senator Richard Burr of North Carolina, worried that the Johnson-Grassley investigation was being used by Russia to spread disinformation ahead of the 2020 election. The inquiry ultimately found no evidence of wrongdoing. Now, that investigation is a distant memory, and Republicans are working to explain their stark change in perspective. corruptions with politicians most of the time or with big business people, Grassley said on Tuesday. In this case, you've got children being killed by bombs. There's no connection. Okay. Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut and another longtime defender of Ukraine noted that for much of the Trump administration, Senate Republicans quietly bolstered Ukraine's defenses and backed Zelensky, even as they remained silent on Trump's undermining of the Zelensky government. Trump was withholding lethal military aid that Congress had provided to Ukraine with broad bipartisan support. I wish they would have made clear that there should be consequences to a president who uses Ukraine as a political chess piece, he says. But there's been a subset of Republicans that are willing to use Ukraine as a political piece in whatever narrative they're trying to spin to win elections. But there's also a subset of Republicans, not necessarily representative of the broader caucus. That is, okay. Representative Steve Scalise of Louisiana, the number 2 House Republican, resurrected talking points from the first Trump impeachment on Tuesday, believe it or not, insisting, misleadingly, that it was Mr. Biden who had withheld aid, while Mr. Trump had given anti-tank weapons to Ukraine after the Obama administration had refused. In 2016, Biden, then vice president, threatened to withhold loan guarantees from Ukraine unless a corrupt prosecutor was fired, in line with the broader international effort to oust that official, but did not ultimately hold back any resources. During a now infamous 2019 phone call that Mr. Trump had with Zelensky, Zelensky had raised purchasing those anti-tank missiles when Trump interjected, "I would like you to do us a favor, though," before launching into a series of politically charged requests, to say the least. President Trump, Scalise says, stood with President Zelensky, and in fact, the two of them had a really good relationship. Wow. Senator John Thune of South Dakota, the number 2 Republican in the Senate, did not try to explain away the inconsistencies. There's a lot of things that happened in the past, none of which I think it makes a lot of sense to relitigate, he said. I just think we have to play the hand we're dealt and do everything we can right now to try and stop this thing. And that means getting all the aid we can to the Ukrainian people to fight the good fight. That's all it takes, to just duck all responsibility. I don't know why Scalise sticks his neck out of that, but so he has. All right. A number of other things to share with you, including, let's see. Where shall we go next? Let me go scroll back up a little bit here. To continue with the earlier theme of warfare in the modern era. An LA Times article that we'll just read a little bit of just to give you a flavor for it so we can jump to a few more things. This is an interesting headline. So starts with a quote. "I want to donate to the Ukrainian military." That's the end of the quote there. "Crowdfunding becomes part of Ukraine's arsenal." I don't think that was something that, generally happened before. Well, there was always war bonds, but just direct donations to another country's military. Matt Pierce, I don't know how, it's not, does he say just Pierce? But it's Pearce. We've used his stuff before, and I've had the same question. Anyway, it was one of the more unusual online crowdfunding efforts in recent years. When Russia invaded Ukraine in late February, many internet users and some mainstream American news outlets shared links for donating to Ukraine's outmatched military. Which, by the way, I have no idea how you could track where your money goes. The official, one official United States, one official Ukrainian armed forces. I don't know whether they have separate armed forces like we do with different branches. Did it, I hope your money, if you gave some, didn't go to any of the weird militias that are out there. Some of them good, some of them bad, some of them inexplicably using weird Nazi-type symbols, apparently, which only fuels the Putin thing about denazifying Ukraine. And I think, to be sure, I think there are, in fact, some weird, fringy neo-Nazi types out there, but I guess we have plenty of them here ourselves. They seem to be everywhere, but there is at least one militia that has that reputation, and they are working with the armed forces, the official armed forces of Ukraine. I don't know. Does any of the funding go to them? I hope not. Who can trace this stuff? Be careful out there. Anyway, the point is, no one has ever really done it quite this way before. One of the crowdfunding supporters was Emmy Gengler, chief executive of Softjourn, whose California-based technology services company has posted information on platforms including Twitter and LinkedIn about how to donate to humanitarian efforts, as well as a National Bank of Ukraine fund to help finance the Ukrainian armed forces. Softjourn, like journal, I don't know. It's all one word, has been supporting the Ukrainian army for the last 8 years, really, since Russian-backed separatists took over part of eastern Ukraine and Crimea, said Gengler. Company support has included medical equipment such as ambulances, and I guess other stuff. I don't know why, but I read that's the end of the sentence, so I have to explain that away now. Softjourn has employees on multiple continents, including about 200 employees based in Ukraine, some of whom have left the country and some of whom are staying and working through the conflict. Gengler said, how do you like that? Work from home doesn't look so good now, does it? I think I'd like to work from a different home, if you don't mind. Calls and meetings are sometimes interrupted by air raid sirens. And I don't know. It's not a funny thing, but I'm thinking of, can you mute, please? Right? My dog came in. Oh, yeah, well, there's an air raid, so. All right, mute yourself, please. Wow. Well, at any rate, that's pretty interesting. In addition to the war hitting close to home for Softjourn, we also have to look at the bigger picture, which is that I do not believe Putin will stop Ukraine, Gengler said. I think he might be forced to. As the U.S. government and other NATO powers send weapons to Ukraine and impose economic sanctions on Russia, many private citizens, companies, and others sympathetic to Ukraine have been waging a parallel effort online to directly and indirectly contribute to the country's resistance and humanitarian efforts. Like many global crises in the 21st century, like the recent digital Dunkirk, that's in quotes there, to help some Afghans flee Taliban rule, a smartphone and an internet connection are sometimes all that's needed for civilians in liberal democracies to pitch in, at least with the geopolitical boundaries drawn by their own governments. The U.S. government, at least so far, has not seemed to try to restrain American citizens from providing aid to Ukraine's armed resistance. Crowdfunding brings internet users into the intimate proximity of the conflict, said Olga Boychak, a Ukrainian-born lecturer in digital cultures and a digital war expert at the University of Sydney in Australia, who has studied the military crowdfunding efforts that had already been underway in Ukraine since 2014. It unsettles the boundary between the military logistics and the civilian logistics. It is kind of an interesting development, don't you think? One more thing we'll throw in here. In the days since the invasion began, cryptocurrency users have sent more than $59 million in crypto assets to the National Bank of Ukraine, or a National Bank of Ukraine account for the military, and to a popular Ukrainian nonprofit, Come Back Alive, that helps provide resources to frontline fighters, according to Elliptic, a crypto analytics company. The National Bank of Ukraine has reported receiving the equivalent of nearly $100,000 in donations in foreign currencies, including the US dollar, euro, British pound, Canadian dollar, Chinese renminbi. I didn't even realize that was renminbi. I thought, well, why is it yuan in my head? Is that wrong? Did they change the name? All right, there's more, though. Japanese yen, Swiss franc, Polish zloty. I don't know how I'm pronouncing that one, but I'm going with the English spelling, and the Australian dollar. I've had several folks reach out and say, hey, I want to donate to the Ukrainian military, said Lindy Kaiser, director for content for clearancejobs.com. What the hell? Okay. Which Kaiser describes as the CNN of the security clearance process. Okay. To get jobs working with classified U.S. government information. I haven't found anything that said that's illegal, but if you have an active clearance, you shouldn't be donating to a foreign military. That's probably good advice. Even though I was on the right side, whatever, but next week people will switch and you'll find yourselves in trouble. There's much more to this story, but again, like I said, I want to bounce around and hit a couple more things. Ordinarily, I would comb through every bit of this and find other weird tidbits inside this, but not today. What else did I put aside? Somewhere here, no idea where, I think I opened up a story that I had seen in Pocket, but it was actually something maybe when I opened up a tab that was a recommended story in Pocket. Here it is, from Wired, just sort of following the cryptocurrency thread in this direction. War is calling crypto's, quote, neutrality into question. War in Ukraine and Western sanctions against Russia have made cryptocurrency a hot potato for international politics. Where's the byline? There it is. Oh, okay. Set off up here. John Volpicelli, and spelled the traditional Italian way, Gian. John Volpicelli. Again, in Wired. Just a bit here. Whose side is cryptocurrency on? If you had asked Satoshi Nakamoto, the pseudonymous, I think I got that, pseudonymous person or persons, possibly, just hedging the bets here. It says it in parentheses, or persons, who created the Bitcoin platform in 2008, he/they likely would have rejected the question. The whole point of cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin was, allegedly, neutrality. The fact that no government, bank, or entity could prevent you from using it, whether you were paying for a pizza, a forbidden book, or a bag of cocaine. And why stop at a bag? Let's get a suitcase. What? A bag of cocaine. Okay. That, of course, I think that's a good sign. I think he's not buying any cocaine. That, of course, started changing as soon as crypto's value made it the perfect medium for criminal transactions, from ransomware to darknet marketplaces. It kind of happened right away, though, didn't it? Regulators around the world demanded that exchanges and other off-ramps blacklist cryptocurrencies from accounts linked to criminal activities or individuals, despite illicit trades accounting for just 0.15% of global crypto movements in 2021. But Russia's invasion of Ukraine is a different matter. Crypto's nature as borderless money and the abundance of youngish, passionate people sitting on troves of crypto millions made it a go-to method for Ukraine to raise funds from people outraged by Moscow's actions. At the same time, there were fears that government officials and Russian President Vladimir Putin's moneyed inner circle might sidestep Western sanctions by moving their assets into crypto. Cryptocurrency exchanges are reportedly blocking all transactions from accounts known to be linked to sanctioned individuals. See how porous that might be. Crypto exchange Coinbase on Monday blocked over 25,000 Russia-linked addresses that it believes were linked to illicit activity to comply with sanctions against Russia. Wired understands that Binance, the world's biggest crypto exchange, has already identified and blocked at least one wallet linked to a sanctioned person. I think the early word from out of Binance was that they weren't going to be doing any of that. But I guess they have. And they have adopted a proactive approach, investigating and blocking accounts of people who are known to be close to individuals targeted by the sanctions. Exchanges in most Western countries are required to carry out know your customer and anti-money laundering checks, although some of them, including Binance, have been criticized for alleged laxity. Yet Tigran Gambarian, I'm guessing, Binance's Vice President of Global Intelligence and Investigations, thinks the concerns that crypto will help to prop up Russia are overblown. Crypto is not a very efficient way for a government and for a nation-state to elude sanctions, he says. There are other ways to move billions of dollars using the financial system that already exists rather than use cryptocurrency. Yeah, but if they're sanctioned, can you do it? I don't know. That is because moving large sums of money in cryptocurrency would hardly be covert. As soon as the owners attempted to convert it into fiat currency outside of Russia, they would alert exchanges and investigators. Obfuscation techniques such as tumblers, wallets that receive cryptocurrency from various accounts and scramble them to conceal provenance, are not designed for moving large sums and tend to be slow, Gambarian says. In addition, all cryptocurrency transactions take place on a public ledger called the blockchain, creating a permanent record that would be undesirable for organizations eager to hide their tracks. Maybe so. Those tumblers, those sound familiar. Is that what we were talking about when, what's her name? Trump's wife. Why am I blanking on her name now? Not, the current one. Melania, yeah. Melania Trump was using the tumblers to disguise the fact that she purchased her own hat or painting of a hat or crypto coin of an NFT of a hat. I don't know what the hell. But whatever, she bid in her own auction. Well, that didn't work either. It is still possible that some illicit trades are happening under the radar. After all, exchanges and cryptocurrency compliance firms do not necessarily know about all the wallets controlled by proxies of an individual on a sanctions list. Historically, we have seen the U.S. Office of Foreign Assets Control name specific crypto wallets relating to sanctioned entities, says Caroline Malcolm, head of international public policy and research at cryptocurrency forensics firm Chainalysis. Get it? Chainalysis? Chainalysis. God, these names. Harder to pronounce than the foreign surnames. We haven't seen any of that yet. We are keeping an eye on whether OFAC, the Office of Foreign Assets Control, or other sanctioned entities in the EU and the UK go on to name specific wallet addresses. It's obviously not something that can be done overnight. There might be missing a lot of them. So anyway, more to this one too, but again, want to jump out and utilize the time we've got left to hit a few more items if I can even identify which ones I want to hit before we get out of here. Well, maybe we continue with this one on a different day, just because it looks like it'll be a lengthier read. But where I would go next, stream of consciousness anyway. New York Times piece published today, byline being Matthew Goldstein, Ken Vogel, a lot, Jesse Drucker, Maureen Farrell, and Mike McIntyre, how Western firms quietly enabled Russian oligarchs. I guess our own, not only London grad, but here in the United States, and how we cozied up to Russian money for a good long time because there was profit to be had in it. So some accounting for that too. Maybe we can take a look at that one tomorrow. But for now, we got to start getting ready to make our exit. So smaller, more dumber stories as a result. Are you ready for this one? Gabriel Malor, M-A-L-O-R, who random guy, an Oklahoman and an attorney, in case you wanted to know, who tweeted this interesting news from the Boston Globe, which is paywalled. I can't get to it, but the interesting summary of the story here. The U.S. government is now the proud owner of my kids will like this, $57,000 Pokemon Charizard card. I know how to say Charizard because I've actually heard that pronounced. Anyway, following the conviction and seizure of property of a Georgia man who, this is terrific, used a coronavirus relief loan to buy the collectible. Really just charming. The story is blocked, of course, but in the description of the story given by others here in the replies, apparently he just went and told the government that he had 10 employees that he would have to lay off, and I don't know whether he even has a business, but 10 employees or so who, and so therefore he needed one of those paycheck protection loans, and then he just, pocketed the money and went and bought a collectible Pokemon card with it. And, hey, what the hell? But that was the downside of loosening up the money. We did say we knew we would run into some fraud occasionally. And when you find it, I guess, look, they've seized the assets back. I don't know what the government's going to do with the Pokemon card. Maybe they can put it up for sale, but they'll probably end up selling it for cryptocurrency to some Russian. And we'll be right back where we started. Anyway, I don't know. That seems like the sort of story I should have covered at the top of the show. But what can you do? All right, let's see. Before I exit completely, I will just note for the record, because we'll want to talk about it tomorrow, something that our Twitter pal Mueller, she wrote, spoke to yesterday. There was a courtroom development of some interest. what was then breaking news, the judge in the Eastman emails case has ruled in favor of the January 6th committee and will be reviewing the emails in camera. More to come. And then here's the rest. The ruling was then published, and she goes on to say, as I predicted, the court does not address the crime fraud issue and simply states that a review is required because of possible third-party exceptions and a concern that the communications weren't about anticipated litigation. You remember the various, 7 different reasons why Eastman should not have been able to claim attorney-client privilege in his emails. And the most damning one, of course, would have been an acknowledgement of the crime fraud exception, because it would have said that the court was endorsing the January 6th committee's theory that a crime, in fact, had been committed. But, probably the best prediction there was that the court would do everything that they could to avoid that. Smart lawyering to give them 6 other reasons to deny his claims of attorney-client privilege. That was a hot one. I might as well throw it in there to make a hint, but it looks like they will instead be focusing on the fact that, you gave this information away to third parties, so it can't be privileged, and it wasn't even prepared in preparation for anticipated litigation. So, nope, we're going to get a look at some of those emails. We just don't know which ones yet. So we'll get back into that. Perhaps there'll be some more reporting on that. There's plenty of other dumb stuff and cool stuff, too, to update you on tomorrow. Plus, we'll be buried by more before then, I'm sure.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
So, a lot of stories today. What could I have possibly missed? Well, why don't you tune in for Justice Putnam's West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy to find out. I can give you a hint on some of these things. Let's see. 173 GOP lawmakers tried to send Congress home instead of voting on Ukraine aid. Ooh, a process story. Pick up the slack for me. We'll see you tomorrow.